I think the first one is a read only, and then second you've got the number 2.
Oh yeah. So the second item is coming from the first item, the read-only item. So Pedro and I were discussing a lot in the Figma file, and Pedro realized it was a really great point that we need to rethink about this request review feature if we are introducing to the user of request attention in the near future. So I just copy and paste some part of his comments in Figma because I agree that request review is part of requesting attention to the reviewer. So are we going to just leave the request feature as it is, or are we going to replacing this if you're going to introducing the new feature? So I'd like to hear your thoughts and also the team's idea. Thank you for putting the design there.
Yeah, I thought it would be easier for Kai also to see what we were talking about.
Is this is down the vein of like attention set, right? Like this is more into that versus just sort of like the simple concept of requesting review, right?
Yeah, so before, I mean, this is what we have today is this button and also the approved indicator. I think we already have that. And so we needed an indication if you're like who has the ball next, right? And we can have that for multiple people at the same time in case you're asking 4 reviewers, or in this case 2 reviewers, to do something in a merge request. But with this indicator, it's not explicit the action that we would like for them to do. We're just saying, as it says here, request attention when you hover over this icon, and then you click and it turns into this filled version. But again, it's implicit. With this button, it's request review. It would be explicit. They would receive a to-do saying XYZ requested, requested a re-review from you. And yeah, so it's the explicit, implicit, and what I thought was that it could be confusing to have 2 buttons where one of them is basically a subset of the other, right? This clicking here is calling someone's attention. This one does the same, but it's saying, hey, what I would like for you to do is really just review. And I think that calling for a reviewer's attention, I would imagine that 90% of the time would cover the case where we would like for them to re-review, right? And if we need additional context on why we need their attention, could be for something else, not necessarily to review, we can just leave a comment explaining that, I guess.
So are you proposing that we don't have like that semicircle button and that we only have the one, like the arrows to like request attention, or sort of, I guess, like what is the ask, or what are we trying to
decide? I think just keeping one of them, and instead of having both. The thing with this button and icon, which could also be on this side, right? We could move it around, but the thing with this icon is that it doesn't give you the, it's not clear if someone has the ball or not compared to this one. Visually, this one is clearer of who needs to take action next, because you have that field, you have the caller in addition. This one, we could do something similar, but to me personally, and this is just my personal opinion, it doesn't seem as strong as this one with the arrow. And so, yeah, it would be try to avoid the duplication and have just one button and one indicator to do it. But yeah, I would like also to hear Sanjan's thoughts on if you think it's worth keeping both or not.
No, I agree with Pedro's point, because I didn't think that was like part of this design scope. So I didn't like remove the current feature. That's just my only intention. And all I heard from some of the casual interview that I heard from like internally is I don't think they understand this current feature of having this circle look like button on the right side. It's not easy to grasp at once. And I think if you're introducing this request attention feature, because it's more visually stronger to me, so I think it would be okay to cover also those cases for the reviewer who has already approved. And then they can also toggle on Frappuccino in this case that like, hey, I need your attention for blah, blah, blah reason. But I'd also love to hear Kai's thought on this.
I would agree that having two buttons is problematic. So I think I'm on board that that is problematic. I guess I'm wondering if maybe the arrows though should just not be buttons, if they are just a visual indicator then, and it's just the circle is the button, and sort of that is the like requesting of attention or requesting you to come back and look at it action. And then based on it being clicked, right, you would toggle the filled or the unfilled sort of piece. I'm not married to like the request a re-review thing. Like I don't necessarily have an issue if we get rid of that terminology and change that terminology to be requesting attention. Because I think you could easily update like to-dos and things to just say like requesting your attention on this merge request. It's maybe a little less clear that it's a review. And I wonder if we're getting away from sort of that intent there, but I think
So
I think the visual indicator is helpful to know that like we're waiting on these people. And I assume like if I play this out logically, like if my name is up there and it has the gold, I guess it's gold, the filled in arrow. It looks gold on my screen. Maybe it's like a yellow mustardy color. But if it's filled
no,
in,
it's more to the gold. Yeah, yeah. Although we call it orange, but yeah.
if it's filled in, then like the drop down, like the merge request icon at the top would show me like all of the merge requests where my chevron is filled in, I guess is sort of like the intent. And I think that to me is like the key, and I'm sort of indifferent to the interaction of how we get there. I like the extra visual indicator, but to me, it doesn't jump out as like a button. It jumps out as like a visual indication, not as something that I would click. Whereas like the arrow circle thing feels like an action that you can take. But
yeah, I think that's valid. Yeah, I think ideally, to be as clear as possible, we would have an indicator and a button. So like clicking on a button kind of turns on and off the lights, right? And yeah, I think we could explore making the indicator look more like a button, in the same way. Like one example that immediately came to mind is these buttons here that are indicators but are also buttons. They're interactive, right? And you can, if I click on them, you notice you have like the blue halo effect, and it tells me that I clicked on it. And if others have clicked on it, we have this indicator as well with the numbers. So maybe we could do something here to make it look more like a button. And what I like about what I like about I'm just going to repeat myself. It's just that I think having just one way of doing it, I think it's the right thing. And I'm also not married to the wording of a request review or even the button itself. I think, it's today. It's not an accessible feature to everyone because you have to use the review feature to show this for yourself. So I would also imagine that not a lot of people are using this. So yeah.
Yeah, I think internally no one uses it because we sort of said the policy was to unassign yourself after you've done your review. So no one internally has probably even seen it, or very rarely has seen it. So yeah, I think I like the idea of also incorporating some kind of attention set type piece with this. I think that makes sense. The interaction piece, I wouldn't have a problem if every single person had the circle next to them and you could just do it that way. And the icons were just sort of visual at that point. Like, to me, that wouldn't be a huge issue. I think ultimately the language piece of what happens is going to be the more important thing, because, and maybe that's where we have to be careful, is because I think like clicking that button and saying like requesting your attention, I think people are going to be like, attention for what? Like, they're going to need to know. Whereas like asking someone to review is sort of very explicit. Like, it gives them like a very actionable thing to do, I guess. So I feel like we've got to think about that is almost maybe more important to solve, is like, if we go to sort of where there's only one model to click in, how do we sort of make sure that the language used for those is clear to tell people what your expectation of them is? I think if we say request attention, I think that's probably not the right, that feels like the wrong language. And maybe Amy's got some ideas. And requesting a review feels like, okay, I know what I'm supposed to do with this. And like, if I was the author and I got pinged, I would expect that like that message comes back and says something along the lines of like, feedback for you to review, or something along, some way to like tell people why they've gotten that notification, versus just like, you need to go look at this. Sort of, it needs that action verb.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think ideally we would have the same. Yeah, we would have to work on it, but ideally we would have the same terminology for reviewers and for assignees, because that's how we would base, like, for example, let's imagine that for reviewers, we kept the request review, but for assignees, we changed, and the hover of the button would say, I don't know, request follow-up or request attention, or I don't know, something different. I think then the problem is that we would also probably have to support different quick actions, and also the filter would be difficult to name, or we would have two filters, and I don't know. But I think the goal is interesting. I'm just not sure if it's feasible.
I think you could do all of it with like the same naming convention and the same concept. I think the to-do and the email that you get are the pieces that need like the language help. Like if you think about the way like mentions work,
That's interesting. Yeah.
like if you think about the way mentions work in comments right now, right? Like if I put your name in the middle of like a sentence, it just sort of says like you were mentioned on a comment. But if I put your name at the start of the sentence, the to-do says you were directly addressed, right? Like we manipulate the to-do a little bit based on like where your name shows up. And so like if you're a reviewer, maybe we just like the first language pass is sort of we default to like requested a re-review. Right. And then like it's waiting, like the to-do says like blah 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 requested a re-review of so and so, like whatever merge request, right? And then like that's what the to-do in email says. The filter is still like requires your attention or waiting for you or whatever like the general concept is called. And I think the same with like the author, we could do something along those lines where it's like you know, you've received feedback on this merge request and like it requires your attention or something, like, you know, whatever. We could figure out how to wordsmith that, but it's the email and the to-do that need that language. I think everything else just sort of says like attention requested or something, right? Like very generic, right, that like you need to pay attention to it, but we just try and clean up the language of the notification.
Well, I think that makes sense. What I was interpreting in the beginning was that what made this not as clear as you would like it to be was this tooltip. When you hovered the button saying request attention, I thought you meant that you wouldn't know what this means because it didn't say request attention to review this or something. You know what I'm saying? I thought that was the problem, not so much the receiving end. It was the person who is triggering the action. Or maybe it's both.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think the tooltip should say like, I think like if we were to talk about this like in docs, let's just call it like if we call the feature, man, that's such a good name, attention set. But like if we call the feature something like that, you would talk about that and you would say like, you would describe the icons as saying like, this means that your attention has been requested or that this one's waiting on you to like action it. But like in the language of the button, you would probably say like down by the reviewers, it would probably say like, I think the first pass of this is like request review is what that says because it's super clear. And then if users think they need like more ways to signal that, like we try and approach like, how do we change the way people describe or signal that? But I think like we want to be very explicit that like the goal of this is to request a review. I don't know if that makes it more muddy or more clear, but I think like just saying request attention to me is like, if I was an author and I clicked somebody and it said request attention, like why did I request their attention? Like then I'm probably going to have to go leave a comment that says, hey, I requested your attention so you would review this, versus if it's very clear to me that like I'm requesting their attention because I want them to review it, sort of. And there might be other cases where you're requesting attention to like merge it. And I think to your comments earlier, like, sure, so I requested your review, but I go leave a comment that says, hey, Pedro, will you merge this? Like, because you're a maintainer sort of deal. Like, I think people will adapt to like the non-request review, but if 80% of the use case is always requesting a review, like let's just use the language that they probably want that to have.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, we could just adapt this for reviewers to say, request attention to review or something like that.
Yeah.
and that's it. And then for assignees, it just says request attention or request something else that makes more sense.
Yeah, I think that works too. Like, I think that's a very logical, like sort of extension or way to phrase that. I think it just needs to like both pieces where all the wording is. I think we just want to be like try and be more clear of like what's going to happen. Like to the user, we should be very clear about like, if you click this, this is sort of like what you're asking them to do. And then I think the person who receives it, it also needs to be very clear that like their attention was requested for XYZ reason, not just like something random sort of. Also, I like the button version that you put up above. That sort of makes things a little more clear that that would be a button if we did something like that and got rid of the circle icon.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting how people absorb certain icons and interpret them as being actions, and they don't need like the border and the look of a button. But if it's something slightly uncommon, perhaps, that people don't associate with an action, they don't think it's a button. I think that's interesting. Like for example, even this clipboard icon, it's an object. It's not an action, right? It doesn't. But we by learning, we already know. Oh, maybe this is copied clipboard because we've seen it over and over again. But it's an object, not communicating action, motion, or whatever. So yeah, that was an aside. Cool. Sanjung, any other thoughts or questions?
No, I think that feedback was really valuable and clear to me. So I just made a note in our doc.
Okay.
I think we can come up with another example and then run another task.
Cool. How is the turnaround in the validation in the usertesting.com? Is it
think,
too quick?
yeah, if I release the task, then it should be done within a day. So I'm not worrying about the time frame that much.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I think we can just focus on designing and then launch the task, and we will get the results.
Focusing on doing our job. Yeah, that's great. Good news. Okay, so let's quickly jump to the next point. So we're coming up to the end of the milestone. Sanjung's last milestone with us, and yeah, she's been doing an amazing work, and now we have to follow through with it. I read through all of the comments that our colleagues left in the design feedback issue for consolidating the main information and actions in merge requests. And I think there are two things that stood out to me that I personally already believed, and I saw validation of that it's a good idea for us to move forward with that, and could be two quick wins that don't have a lot of how should I say, like ripple effects that could cause us to doubt their validity. And one of them, so let me move this to the top. So the first one is, I think the consolidation of the actions at the top is great. And I kind of think that we don't need necessarily to do it sticky to have value. Right, we can still, so I'm trying to find something to share with you. I still think there's value of enhancing the existing actions area that today we only have close merge requests, mark as ready, and report to have these actions approve, merge, and the other ones that open with is another one. And also showing the branch name right at the top. I think there's value in that, in pursuing that, maybe polishing the edges of the design here and there if necessary, but I think it's something that everyone agrees is good. I'm still very much concerned about the sticky, so that's why I'm not mentioning it right now. And the other thing is this very simple idea of just adding a couple of options to the submit review button that allows you to just submit the review or submit and approve at the same time, which is something that I do a lot with a quick action, but we all know that, I mean, not know, but we can all easily assume that quick actions are not very discoverable. And yeah, and then I have a very long paragraph below about my main concern with the added height and the sticky behavior, and that it would add a lot of problems in terms of the space available for reviewing, and yeah, and I also see that this is very much connected to other things. Like, for example, we haven't solved this part here with the unresolved threads. We just kept it here, but we kind of know that maybe this is not the right location. We actually had feedback from internal folks that have been with GitLab for some time now, that they find the connection between this controls and the overview and the changes that they kind of don't understand, because to them, this should be close to the comments and close to the list of comments somehow. Yeah, and there are other things regarding the navigation. And I think all of this is connected. At some point, as I mentioned there, Kai said, hey, why don't we remove all of the tabs? And yeah, maybe it's not a crazy idea. Maybe it's something worth exploring. And I think we need to look and get some insights on all of this, not necessarily solve all of them, but answer these tricky questions about all of these parts before we can introduce something that we can already anticipate will have some negative reactions. Because it's sticky, it's always there. And people already complain a lot with the available space for reviewing. And also the cognitive is also the other thing, is just the cognitive overload that we already have today with the tabs, these controls and these controls and these controls and the file header. And in addition, we're adding all of this at the top, which is useful, but it's just a lot to always have visible. Yeah. So these are my thoughts on what I think is in a good place and what I think we should explore further. But in the last minute that we have available, I wanted to hear your thoughts as well.
Your proposal would be that, like, in the designs, there's like basically the edit. What we have currently is edit and market draft. Markers draft is sort of the buttons at the top. We'd be changing that out for potentially open with, approve, and merge buttons. And the merge button would always just say merge, or are we going to get into like the super complicated world of like that button can say 500 things and then it's going to take up the whole width and then everything will die up at the top, right? Like we'll need all of the width to deal with that. I guess that's sort of like, I think that's a good iteration, although I was looking and like, I feel like clicking on Marcus draft and now that's going to be buried in a menu. Like, I almost feel like there's just so many actions that changing these out, maybe that isn't the right call either, but I don't know. I think it's worth testing. I guess maybe that's the answer. It is worth testing those as top level buttons inside of the merge request to see like what people say. And like, depending on the level of effort, maybe we can throw together, someone could put an MR together relatively easily. Should ask, be worth asking, and like feature flag it and turn it on for like the GitLab group and just see sort of what people say as like a way to do that user test versus maybe trying to send it through like user testing or something. It might just be better to do it and toggle it on. And if we get a ton of feedback that it's not great, then like we know we sort of need to spend more time there.
Yeah, I think, yeah, we would, I should have prefaced this, that regardless, I think we need some validation, especially this part of consolidating the actions, because it's a very visible change, and we would be changing the location of buttons. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think the good start would be just running like a moderated test, and also if we implement it and also just put it behind the feature flag just for the GitLab box, and then we will receive tons of feedback, I think. Or if we have more time, I think we can also have moderated tests within GitLab before we start implementing this. Because it's really big change. It changed their UX flow quite a lot. So I think it's okay to be more conservative at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I think we'll need, if we're gonna go the testing route, then like maybe we see if we can. I don't know what your capacity now looks like for 14.1, Pedro, that we'll lose. Back to busy.
Yeah, I'll have to toggle the busy indicator for the rest of my life. Yeah, I just wanted to run this by you two, and we can. Yeah, I'll have to think about how we're going to accommodate all of this. Yeah, I just wanted to know. I'm not going to talk again about the approve and comment or just comment in the submit review. I just wanted to know if the concerns that I have with the sticky behavior and the added height, if it's something that resonates with both of you or not. And if not, we can talk about this in another time.
Yeah, I think I am less concerned about the sticky behavior. I think to me, the value of putting the controls where you are and like visible all the time sort of outweighs the, I don't know, 20 pixels or whatever height it is that you're going to lose on the screen. I say that with my like, big monitors and one that's turned vertical, that like, it doesn't matter if I lose that, but I say that in that way because I think, I think if we think about like the problem to solve, the chief complaint is like, those things are lost in the middle of the page and I have no idea where they are, how to get to them. And I have to go to this other tab. And I think like the sticky thing addresses that more than just like changing things at the top. Changing it at the top helps a little, like at least I could always know I have to scroll to the top. Like it gives it a fixed position on the page.
That helps a lot already.
Yeah, which is a step in the right direction. And so like maybe we try that, but like I'm less concerned about, I think, the sticky piece, because I think that just makes it there when you want it. Like if you scroll to the bottom of a very long merge request and then you've got to like, scroll all the way back up, like that's still more effort that you've got to put in.
Sanjung?
I agree with Kai, because when I was working at my previous job, I used GitLab as a designer, and my first trial, I couldn't find the merge button at the time. So I just found, I felt lost a little bit, but of course, after like a couple of times, I found it. But I think it's important to have a certain like common center, and we got a couple of feedback also in the async design review from the UX department. So I'm not against to having the sticky header, but I also agree with like having a lot of like height would also decrease some part of the UX, that especially the large MR, I think, because they need to scroll a lot. So maybe for the next iteration, it would be we need to think about the compare tab in the change tabs. So it's just below the changes, like there's comparing master and blah, blah, blah. I think we can accommodate those things into the sticky header if we imagine how GitHub handle does that. I think it is doable, but I didn't include that into this issue scope because it was not written in the requirement, and I don't think that's doable within the milestone that I have given. So, but I think if we handle that, it should be doable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's worth exploring if you have a bit of time, just to create a visual, if it's just a napkin sketch out of that. But yeah, I think that could alleviate some of the things. At the same time, yeah, and that's related again to what I was saying about the threads controls, is that things start to look disconnected. So if I think that's not, I think that's a good idea, but at the same time, it moves the controls that today are just above the diff, the compare and the preferences for side by side and so on. Those are immediately above the diff. And if we would move those above the tabs when you scroll, they are no longer close to what they would change, right? They would have the navigation. So yeah, pros and cons, but yeah, let's experiment and see. I guess seeing is believing. Cool. I think I'm done from my side. I don't know if anyone else wants to talk about anything.
No, I think I'm good. Great to see everyone. Enjoy your week.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for accommodating the change in the timing of the meeting.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.